Get ready to have your history books rewritten. This video exposes shocking truths about some of the most common historical myths. From the pyramids of Egypt to the American Revolution, we'll uncover the real stories behind these fascinating narratives. Remember learning that Columbus discovered America, or that Cleopatra was Egypt's ultimate femme fatale? Yeah, turns out history's been playing us like a bad Matrix sequel. We've all swallowed myths spun by Hollywood, schoolbooks, or overzealous storytellers, but the truth? It's messier, weirder, and way more interesting. Grab a coffee or something stronger, and let's bust 5 history myths that'll make you rethink everything you thought you knew. I'll never forget the day my high school teacher waxed poetic about Columbus sailing the ocean blue, painting him as some caped crusader of exploration. Spoiler, he wasn't. History's full of these tall tales, polished to a shine by time and pop culture. Why do we believe them? Because they're simple, dramatic, and fit neatly into a 45-minute class. But the real stories behind the pyramids, Cleopatra's brainpower, or the so-called Dark Ages are so much juicier. We're diving into 5 myths that have fooled us for ages, armed with facts, a few laughs, and a red pill of truth straight out of the Matrix. Ready to have your mind blown? Myth 1. The pyramids were built by slaves. Picture this: a scorching Egyptian desert, whips cracking, and thousands of enslaved people dragging massive stones to build the Great Pyramid of Giza. That's the scene. The 10 Commandments and every Indiana Jones-style epic burned into our brains. It's dramatic, it's cinematic, it's totally wrong. The idea that slaves built the pyramids is one of history's biggest misconceptions, and the truth is way more fascinating. Let's set the stage. Around 2600 BCE, the pharaohs of Egypt's Old Kingdom were flexing their power by building the pyramids at Giza, the ultimate look-at-me monuments. The Great Pyramid, Khufu's masterpiece, required 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing about 2.5 tons. Moving that kind of weight sounds like a job for an army of miserable slaves, right? Not so fast. Archaeologist Mark Lehner, who spent decades digging around Giza, found evidence that flips this myth on its head. His team uncovered workers' villages near the pyramids, complete with bakeries, breweries, and cemeteries. Not exactly the setup for a slave labour camp. These workers were skilled labourers, likely farmers recruited during the Nile's flood season when fields were underwater. They weren't chained up. They were fed bread, beer, and meat. Basically, the ancient Egyptian equivalent of a catered lunch. Lehner's excavations revealed workers even got medical care, with bones showing signs of healed fractures and surgeries. Some had their own tombs near the pyramids, a huge honour. Think less Indiana Jones whip-cracking and more unionised construction crew griping about the boss. Picture a worker, let's call him Amun, muttering, "Khufu better appreciate this pyramid, because my back's killing me." The logistics were mind-boggling. Workers hauled stones from quarries, floated them down the Nile, and used ramps to stack them with precision that still baffles engineers. They weren't slaves, but proud craftsmen, possibly seeing their work as a patriotic duty. So why the myth? It started with Herodotus, a Greek historian in the 5th century BCE, who heard exaggerated tales of forced labour. Hollywood ran with it, and suddenly we're picturing Charlton Heston sweating under a whip. The truth? These guys were more like the rock stars of their day, building wonders that still stand 4,500 years later. Next time you're marvelling at Giza, raise a beer to Amun and his crew. They earned it. Myth 2. Cleopatra was a seductive Egyptian beauty. Cleopatra. The name conjures images of Elizabeth Taylor in a sequined gown, batting her eyelashes to charm Roman generals. Hollywood sold us a sultry Egyptian queen who seduced her way to power. But the real Cleopatra 7 was way more Game of Thrones' Daenerys than rom-com starlet, minus the dragons, but with better political instincts. Let's debunk the myth of Cleopatra as Egypt's ultimate femme fatale and uncover a woman whose brain was her real superpower. First off, Cleopatra wasn't even Egyptian. Born in 69 BCE, she was a descendant of Ptolemy I, a Greek general under Alexander the Great. Her family, the Ptolemies, ruled Egypt for centuries but kept their Greek culture, rarely bothering with the local language. Cleopatra, though, she broke the mould. Historian Stacey Schiff notes she was the first Ptolemy to speak Egyptian fluently, along with 8 other languages. Imagine her switching from Greek to Ethiopian to Parthian like it's no big deal, while her advisors scrambled to keep up. That's not a seductress, that's a linguistic boss. The seductress myth comes from Roman propaganda and Hollywood's love for drama. Roman writers like Plutarch painted her as a temptress to vilify her alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But coins from her reign tell a different story. Her face wasn't exactly movie star material, with a hooked nose and strong jaw. Her power came from charisma and strategy, not looks. She kept Egypt independent during Rome's expansion by playing Caesar and Antony like a pro, securing grain supplies and military support. Picture her eyeing Hollywood's glitzy portrayals and muttering, "Really? Sequins? I was more about scrolls and power moves." Here's a surprising fact. Cleopatra's charm wasn't about bedroom eyes, but her wit and intellect. She hosted lavish banquets, sure, but they were diplomatic chess games, not flirt fests. Schiff describes her as a master of theatrical self-presentation, staging spectacles to wow allies. She once sailed to meet Antony on a golden barge, dressed as Venus, with perfumed sails. That's not seduction, that's branding. The myth persists because it's sexier than multilingual queen outsmarts Rome. But Cleopatra's real story is a masterclass in brains over beauty. Sorry, Elizabeth Taylor, you're fabulous, but the real Cleo was a nerd's hero. Myth 3. The Dark Ages were a cultural void. When you hear Dark Ages, what comes to mind? Probably Monty Python and the Holy Grail, muddy peasants, plague, and knights yelling "Nigh" at random. The Middle Ages, roughly 5th to 15th centuries, are often painted as a cultural black hole, a time when Europe wallowed in ignorance after Rome's fall. Wrong. The so-called Dark Ages were buzzing with innovation, art, and ideas that laid the groundwork for the modern world. Let's shine a light on this misunderstood era. The Dark Ages label was a Renaissance marketing ploy. Scholars like Petrarch in the 14th century wanted to hype their own era as a rebirth, so they trashed the centuries before as bleak and backward. Medievalist Judith Bennett calls this propaganda that stuck. In reality, the Middle Ages saw the birth of universities, Bologna, 1088, Oxford, 1096, Gothic cathedrals like Notre Dame, and manuscripts that preserved Greek and Roman knowledge. Islamic scholars in Spain and Baghdad translated Aristotle and Euclid, keeping classical texts alive while Europe rebuilt. Take the Carolingian Renaissance under Charlemagne, 8th to 9th centuries. He standardized writing, creating the Carolingian minuscule, a clear script that's the ancestor of modern lowercase letters. Imagine a monk, Brother Alcuin, hunched over a candle, inventing the book spine while grumbling about barbarian stereotypes. Innovations weren't just academic. The heavy plough revolutionized farming, boosting food production. The period wasn't all rosy. Wars and disease happened. But calling it dark is like calling Monty Python a documentary. Here's a surprising fact. The term Dark Ages is a misnomer coined centuries later. The Middle Ages gave us illuminated manuscripts, like the Book of Kells, with art so intricate it'd make your Instagram filter jealous. Viking trade networks stretched from Greenland to Baghdad, and monks like Bede wrote histories that still inform us today. So why the myth? It's easier to sell a rebirth if you pretend what came before was a snooze. The Middle Ages weren't dark, they were a vibrant, messy bridge to modernity. Myth 4. Christopher Columbus discovered America. Raise your hand if you learned that in 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, discovered America, and proved the Earth was round. Yeah, me too. Except that story's about as accurate as a Pirates of the Caribbean plotline. Columbus didn't discover America, didn't prove the Earth's shape, and wasn't the hero schoolbooks made him out to be. Let's unpack this navigational disaster of a myth. First, Columbus didn't discover America. When he landed in the Caribbean in 1492, likely the Bahamas, not the US mainland, millions of indigenous peoples were already living across the Americas, with complex societies from the Aztecs to the Iroquois. Historian Howard Zinn, in A People's History of the United States, notes that these cultures had been thriving for millennia. Oh, and the Vikings beat Columbus to North America by about 500 years, with Leif Erikson's settlement at Vinland, Columbus, late to the party. Here's the kicker. Columbus thought he'd reached Asia until he died. He called the locals Indians because he was convinced he'd hit the East Indies. Picture him arguing with his crew, "This is totally Japan," while standing in Cuba, like a 15th century GPS user refusing to admit he's lost. The Earth's roundness. Already common knowledge among educated Europeans, thanks to ancient Greeks like Eratosthenes, who measured its circumference in 240 BCE. Columbus's real impact was sparking European colonization, often brutally. Zinn details his enslavement of Taino people and violent governorship, which even shocked his contemporaries. So why the myth? Early American historians needed a founding hero, and Columbus fit the bill. Never mind the genocide. His story was polished into a tale of bravery, ignoring the messy truth. Next time you hear Columbus discovered America, channel your inner Jack Sparrow and mutter, "Mate, he didn't even know where he was." Myth 5. The American Revolution was a unified rebellion. Picture the American Revolution, colonists shouting no taxation without representation, in perfect harmony, united against British tyranny, with Paul Revere galloping through the night like a scene from Hamilton. That's the myth. A tidy, patriotic tale of a united front for freedom. The reality, the revolution was a chaotic mess, with colonists split, scheming, and sometimes siding with the redcoats. Let's debunk the idea that 1776 was one big revolutionary high five. Historian Gordon S. Wood estimates that about 20% of colonists were loyalists, staying loyal to Britain, while many others were neutral, just trying to survive. The revolution wasn't a unified USA, USA chant, but a civil war with class tensions, regional rivalries, and messy motives. Wealthy elites wanted economic control, while poorer farmers grumbled about taxes, British or not. Enslaved people, making up 20% of the population, often saw the British as a better bet for freedom, as the Crown offered emancipation to those who fought for them. Take Paul Revere's famous ride. Longfellow's poem made it sound like a solo, lantern-lit epic. But Revere was one of many riders, and his trip was less Hamilton musical and more frantic group chat. Imagine him posting on X, "Brits coming, RT." Not quite as poetic. Women like Abigail Adams pushed for rights, writing to John Adams to "remember the ladies." But their contributions were sidelined. A surprising fact. Some colonists joined the British for stability, not oppression, fearing a rebel victory would tank the economy. The myth of unity came later, when a young America needed a feel-good origin story. Hamilton's catchy tunes don't tell you about the loyalists tarred and feathered or the enslaved people caught in the crossfire. Wood calls the revolution a complex, divisive struggle, and that complexity makes it all the more human. The colonists weren't a monolith, they were a messy, arguing bunch just like us. These truths don't diminish history, they make it richer, like swapping a black and white movie for a 4K epic. Uncovering these stories is like taking the red pill in the Matrix. Suddenly, you see the world as it is, not as it's been sold. History's not a neat timeline. It's a chaotic, human mess, full of surprises and contradictions. Next time you hear a too good to be true tale, dig deeper. What history myth do you want debunked next? Cleopatra's nose job or Paul Revere's TikTok? Drop it in the comments and let's keep rewriting those history books together.